In archives dedicated to Egyptology, there is a very important page that could essentially change the entire history of ancient Egypt studies. This document is kept in a dusty volume dated 1883 and is titled Pyramids and Temples of Giza. It is on this page that the results are recorded, which at the time caused a real revolution in understanding how these mysterious structures were built. It contains very dry and meticulous calculations made by the English scholar Sir William Flinders Petrie, a man considered the father of modern Egyptology. However, these calculations do not include the usual measurements of the pyramid's height or its angles of inclination. No, he was studying something else. He paid attention to the traces left by the builder's tools, to the tiniest details that could reveal the secret of ancient craftsmen's technology. While examining a granite sarcophagus located in the pharaoh's chamber, he discovered that unusual tubular drills had been used for its processing. These drills penetrated one of the hardest types of stone on the planet, granite, with a force of 2 tons. Imagine, at a time when people seemingly only used copper chisels and stone hammers, such technology seemed impossible. But that was exactly the case. Elsewhere, analyzing spiral grooves on granite artifacts, he calculated that the drill feed rate was 500 times higher than that of 19th century tools. These figures shocked him. A man of science and logic, Petrie was perplexed. In his world, where copper tools and primitive instruments prevailed, such technological achievements seemed impossible. He recorded these anomalies, wrote down the figures that seemed to shout about inconsistencies, and left them for future generations. But unfortunately, subsequent researchers chose to simply ignore them. This incredible story was buried under layers of oblivion. It was replaced by the familiar and convenient legend of pharaohs and slaves, which became the only truth for many. But what if these mysterious numbers are not a mistake? What if behind them lies the trace of a civilization that, according to our textbooks, never existed? Perhaps these are not just mysteries of stone monuments, but fingerprints of ancient engineers left for the ages. This is not only an investigation into how the pyramids were built, it is an attempt to understand why we were lied to about them for an entire century. Why were the facts related to these ancient structures hidden or distorted in official sources? It all begins with those impossible figures that remained on dusty pages of old books and documents. It is there that the key to a revelation lies, which could overturn our understanding of antiquity. Before moving on to the main part of the research, I would like to ask for a small favor. Any of your participation, showing interest, paying attention to the topic, is very important. Your calm perception and curiosity are the best gratitude for the work done. Thank you for your understanding. To grasp the scale of the anomaly we encountered, one must go back to the late 19th century, to the era when the first serious steps were taken in the study of ancient Egypt. At that time, the Giza Plateau was not the popular tourist destination we see today. It was a wild, dangerous frontier filled with tomb robbers, adventurers seeking riches, and accidental travelers who found themselves there by chance. Archaeology as a science was just beginning to take shape, and its methods were very crude. It often resembled looting. Everyone was eager to find treasures, without regard for accuracy or scientific rigor. Then in the 1880s, a young, somewhat eccentric Englishman named William Flinders Petrie entered this chaos. The deeper Petrie delved into the details, the clearer it became that his rational Victorian mind was encountering phenomena difficult to explain using conventional technologies and methods. He expected to find at least traces of manual craftsmanship, even if highly skilled, since he believed that ancient artisans possessed skills passed down through generations. However, surprisingly, everything he found resembled machine-made marks. In the royal chamber, in a sarcophagus carved from a single block of Aswan granite, he noticed that the internal angles were cut with such precision that verifying them would require modern tools used in machine shops. These angles were so perfectly crafted that their accuracy could only be achieved with a high-precision machine or similar modern equipment. In his hands, he held dozens of diorite vessels and cups, objects carved from one of the hardest and most durable stones, with perfectly smooth surfaces and symmetrical curves that seemed to have been created solely by a lathe. But the most astonishing discovery was the traces of drilling. Petrie found numerous signs of the use of tubular drills. hollow cylinders rotating inside the stone and cutting cylindrical cores from it. Carefully examining these cores and holes, he was able, like a forensic investigator, to determine the characteristics of the tools that left these marks. And these characteristics were impossible to explain with Bronze Age technology. Spiral grooves on the cores indicated that the drill penetrated the granite at a rate of about 2.5 millimeters per revolution. In contrast, a modern diamond drill bites into stone at about 1.5 millimeters per revolution. This meant that the ancient tool was 500 times more efficient than a modern one. To achieve such a feed rate, the drill would have to be subjected to an incredible force, estimated by Petrie at around 2 tons. He found himself at an impasse. Part 3 of 14. Copper drills, even when used with abrasive sand, could not have left such deep marks. They would have simply broken or deformed without creating such results. In his book, he honestly admitted, the method by which the ancient Egyptians worked with such granite remains a mystery. Essentially, he stated, it seems we have yet to uncover some ancient techniques and skills that were used in those times. This was a remarkable admission for someone who himself laid the foundations of scientific Egyptology. He directly said, I see signs of technologies that should not have existed here. However, the scientific community he helped shape preferred to ignore these evidence. It was much easier to accept the conventional version, that tens of thousands of slaves with copper chisels and simple tools created these granite monuments. This version seemed straightforward. It fit into a linear progression in a logical chain of technological development. Anomalies discovered by Petrie were quickly swept under the rug, where they remained for nearly a century. Everything changed when another person, an engineer from the modern era, decided to verify these old, seemingly outdated calculations, armed with the most advanced measuring instruments of the 21st century. At the end of the 20th century, a man appeared on the Giza Plateau who looked at the pyramids not with the eyes of an archaeologist, but with the eyes of an engineer. His name was Christopher Dunn. He dedicated his entire life to the world of high technology, working in the fields of precise measurements and manufacturing, where accuracy is achieved in microns and surface quality is controlled with lasers. He came to Egypt not to search for tombs or treasures, but to test a simple hypothesis. If something looks as if it was made by a machine, then it was most likely created by a machine. Dunn equipped himself not with a pickaxe or a shovel, but with precision measuring instruments, calibration plates, squares, and flatness indicators to take exact measurements and compare the results with those obtained in ancient times. He revisited the same ancient artifacts that previously baffled scientists like Petrie, but now his perspective was different. He examined these finds from the standpoint of modern manufacturing technologies, and his conclusions were astonishing, almost shocking to those accustomed to thinking of ancient Egypt merely as a people who created primitive objects. Starting with the study of the sarcophagus found in the chamber intended for the king of the Great Pyramid, he noticed one important detail. Egyptologists believed that this sarcophagus was hollowed out from the inside using stone balls, as scientists called them. But Dunn, armed with his modern tools, decided to test this assumption. He carefully placed his precision square against the inner surface of the sarcophagus, then illuminated it from behind with a flashlight. As a result, he saw something astonishing. No ray of light passed through the gap between the square and the perfectly smooth granite wall. This meant that the surface was perfectly flat, with tolerances that today can only be achieved through machine grinding. But the most astonishing discovery awaited him in the corners. The inner angles of the sarcophagus were not rounded, as would naturally occur when working with stone spheres. They were sharp, with a minimal radius of curvature typical of milling or sawing tools. This fact completely shattered conventional ideas about ancient technologies. Next, Donje traveled to the Serapeum in Saqqara, where an underground complex housed 16 giant granite sarcophagi, each weighing up to 100 tons. Officially, these tombs were intended for the burial of sacred bulls, but for the engineer, they represented an exhibition of impossible technologies. He carefully analyzed the surfaces of these granite boxes and noticed traces that, as an engineer, he could easily identify. These were the marks of enormous saws, up to 10 meters in diameter, used for cutting them. Dange found evidence that these saws cut through granite at incredible speeds, leaving behind perfectly smooth and flat surfaces. He concluded that the lids, weighing about 30 tons, were fitted to the sarcophagi with such precision that they created a hermetic seal. The question naturally arose, why was such precise fitting necessary for the burial of mummified bulls? Logic and analysis suggested to him that this was no coincidence. He systematized his observations and arrived at a conclusion that would be considered heresy in the scientific community. He stated that artifacts of ancient Egypt are not merely handcrafted objects, but evidence of a highly developed machine civilization. He used the term artifacts of indisputable craftsmanship, or OORT, out-of-place artifacts, meaning artifacts that transcend conventional understanding. He argued that we are not only witnessing the craftsmanship of ancient artisans, but also advanced technology. Technology that includes high-speed lathes, milling machines, giant saws, and possibly even ultrasonic processing. He did not speak of aliens or extraterrestrials. He spoke of humans, of a civilization that achieved industrial production thousands of years before our Industrial Revolution. Dange's idea was radical and revolutionary, but it was based not on myths or legends, but on physical evidence, on scratch marks, tolerances, and radii of curvature that an engineer could understand. These facts explained anomalies related to Petra, such as why copper chisels could not have cut granite with such precision. But at the same time, they raised an even deeper question. If such a civilization existed, when exactly was it, and what happened to it? The answer to these questions has perhaps been silently observing us from the Giza Plateau for a long time. Not in the granite of the pyramids, but in softer, yet no less expressive limestone. 5,000 years before our era, this date, which is considered fundamental in modern Egyptology, is based on certain stylistic features and its proximity and age to the Khafra pyramid. It is this date that is accepted as dogma, determining the age of this great monument. However, what if all of this is just part of the story, and in reality the Sphinx is much older than commonly believed? What if traces remain on its surface, evidence of a long-forgotten past that science, for some reason, has ignored or underestimated for over a century? It was this thought that became the starting point for an unusual investigation, and its thread is drawn not from the pen of an Egyptologist, but from the hand of an independent researcher, writer, and amateur scientist named John Anthony West. In the late 1970s, West came across the works of French mathematician and philosopher Richelieu Lubic, who dedicated years to studying the ancient temples in Luxor. This scholar hypothesized that the Egyptian civilization has much deeper roots and origins than generally accepted. In his work, Lubic casually noted that the erosion pattern on the Sphinx's body indicates water action, not wind and sand as previously assumed. This unexpected conclusion intrigued West. If the erosion was caused specifically by rainwater rather than wind-blown sandstorms, then the Sphinx must be much older than the pyramids built during Khafra's era. After all, Egypt's climate in ancient times was not always as arid and lifeless as we know it today. On the contrary, at the end of the last ice age, heavy rains fell in this region, creating conditions for water erosion. But this climatic period ended thousands of years ago, long before Khafra's reign in his epoch. West understood that to confirm his hypothesis, he needed convincing scientific evidence. In the 1990s, he teamed up with geologist Dr. Robert Schoch, a professor at Boston University. This scientist had no specialized training in Egyptology and was not interested in traditional Egyptian history. His focus was solely on studying stone and its characteristics. Together, they traveled to Giza to investigate the Sphinx and the quarry from which it was carved. As a result of their research, Schoch noted that the erosion pattern on the Sphinx's body and the quarry walls clearly shows water-related erosion. Vertical rounded profiles, cracks, and grooves were found in the depths and upper layers of the surface, formed by rainwater flowing over the limestone for thousands of years. This distinctly sets this erosion pattern apart from the more horizontal and sharp forms created by wind-blown sand erosion, which is characteristic of other structures on the Giza Plateau, including the pyramids. The most convincing evidence was the observation that the walls of the pit revealed that the Sphinx was not built, but carved out of a solid rock mass. Consequently, the pit walls are also part of this ancient sculpture, created during the same period. What is particularly interesting is that these same walls show the same type of rain erosion. At the same time, the 4th dynasty tombs, carved into these same walls, display a much less pronounced pattern of wind erosion. This suggests that these tombs were created much later, after the main water erosion had already ceased and the surface had been exposed to wind action. In 1991, Shaw presented his findings at the annual meeting of the Geological Society of America. His conclusion was cautious but quite significant. Based on the collected geological data, he suggested that the original age of the Sphinx should be estimated to be between 7,000 and 5,000 years BCE. It is possible that it is even older, dating back to an era preceding the end of the last ice age. Many thousands of years ago, in distant past, events occurred that today evoke surprise and raise numerous questions among scientists and researchers. These events not only contradicted the existing datings based on the so-called hypsithermal system, but completely undermined its very foundation. Imagine, if we take these new data into account, it becomes clear that ancient Egypt had a highly complex and advanced culture, capable of executing grandiose mega-sculpture projects thousands of years before the appearance of the dynastic civilization, which is usually associated with the historical beginning of Egypt. This would mean that the history of this ancient land is much richer and more intricate than commonly believed. However, the reaction of the scientific community specializing in hypotheses about ancient monuments was very fierce and quite hostile. Dr. Zahi Hawass, then head of the Giza Antiquities Department, and Dr. Mark Lerner, one of the leading experts on the Sphinx, categorically rejected these new ideas. They argued that the evidence of erosion discussed could be explained by simpler and more familiar factors. For example, capillary rise of groundwater or the low quality of limestone from which the statues and sculptures in the vicinity were made. These disputes quickly escalated into sharp and personal conflicts. During the debates, scientists were accused of pseudoscience and of chasing fame and sensationalism. As a result, they were prohibited from continuing research on site, which only heightened mistrust and misunderstanding. Nevertheless, despite such restrictions and opposition, the question remained open and discussions continued. Geological and archaeological evidence put forward by supporters of alternative hypotheses continued to be at the center of attention. And if we assume that the Sphinx is truly as ancient as claimed, then the main question inevitably arises: who was its creator, and what happened to the vanished civilization that could have built it? The weathered body of the Sphinx itself, worn down by rain and wind over centuries, is not just a statue. It is a kind of geological clock, a testament to eras long past. It is an anomaly that points to the existence of a lost chapter of human history, a chapter that official science prefers to ignore or considers unreliable. And perhaps this lost chapter is not entirely gone. Maybe it is inscribed on some ancient papyrus that has been in plain sight for nearly 200 years, but remains a mystery to this day. Every investigation has a moment when everything suddenly becomes clear, when the so-called turning point and eureka moment arrives, when new discoveries and evidence allow us to connect disparate pieces and see the bigger picture. In our case, in the quest to uncover the secret of Egypt's forgotten past, this moment occurs not in dusty excavations, but in a quiet museum hall in the Italian city of Turin. There is stored a document known as the Turin Royal Canon, one of the most important archaeological artifacts. This ancient papyrus may hold the key to solving the puzzle, potentially linking the unexpected technological achievements of Serapeum with the anomalous geological features of the Sphinx. The history of this papyrus can be traced back to the early 19th century, when it was discovered in Fihom by the Italian researcher Bernard Nadrovetti. It was in terrible condition, broken into more than 160 fragments that seemed nearly impossible to piece together. But when it was carefully examined by the renowned Egyptologist Jean-François Champollion, famous for deciphering the Rosetta Stone, he realized how valuable this document was. The papyrus dates to the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses II, approximately in 1253 BCE, and was written in an erotic script. It contains a detailed list of all Egyptian rulers, from the earliest times to the era of Ramesses. Before listing the names of Menes or Narmer, the first pharaohs of the first dynasty, who, according to historical data, unified Egypt around 3100 BCE. It is worth pausing to note that the Turin Canon, a very ancient papyrus containing an important and detailed chronology, describes not only these reigns but also the two previous eras that preceded the rise of Egyptian civilization. At the beginning of this list is a enumeration of divine rulers, gods who, according to ancient Egyptian beliefs, ruled the land for millennia. This list starts with the image of a bird, symbolizing wealth and creation, and continues with the names of gods such as Ra, Geb, Osiris, Seth, and Horus. According to these ancient records, their reigns are measured in thousands of years, immediately creating a sense of scale and antiquity for these legendary eras. After the reigns of the gods, another mysterious group of rulers appears in the papyrus, often translated as spirits or demigods. In the Egyptian language, this term is called Shem-Sugar, which can be literally translated as followers of the mountain. According to the records, this group, consisting of those who may have been connected with mythical or semi-divine beings, ruled Egypt for approximately 13,420 years. Only after this very long period, filled with legends and myths, does the papyrus proceed to list the actual historical rulers, the pharaohs who had a human origin. The first of them is considered to be Menes, and his reign is regarded as the beginning of Egypt's historical dynasty. For modern Egyptologists, especially those studying the 10th and 20th centuries BCE, these initial sections of the papyrus seem more like mythological insertions, a legendary prologue created by the ancient Egyptians to emphasize the divine origin of their civilization and to lend it antiquity and grandeur. In reality, these sections are perceived as myths and legends, no more. However, questions once again arise at this point, and scientists like John Anthony West and Robert Schoch attempt to find answers. Referring to modern geological data, it can be suggested that the Sphinx was carved during a period of heavy rains approximately 12,000 years ago or even earlier, indicating an extremely ancient age for this monument. Suddenly, the reign of the mountain followers, lasting 13,420 years, begins to seem less like a fantastical hypothesis. This duration almost perfectly coincides with the period, according to geological studies, required for the formation of certain geological layers and age-related characteristics associated with this monument. What if the Turin Canon itself is not merely a mixture of myths and legends, but a genuine, continuous historical source? What if the ancient Egyptians, with their characteristic meticulousness and pursuit of accuracy, recorded real events, biblical or historical, that extended far beyond 3,100 years BCE? Could these mysterious Shem-Sugar, the very rulers mentioned, have been rulers of a lost civilization from the Ice Age era? It is quite possible that they were the creators of those megalithic structures, the Sphinx, and perhaps even the builders of the sarcophagi in the Serapeum. And if we think about it, we might suppose that the gods we know from myths are distorted memories of distant ancestors, foundational figures whose contribution to human culture was so great that over time, their deeds were exaggerated, transforming them into mythical images. This hypothesis undoubtedly seems explosive because it challenges the conventional understanding of the origin of ancient Egyptian civilization. It suggests that the dynastic civilization of the pharaohs did not emerge out of nowhere. It was not simply a product of the pharaohs themselves, nor a common memorial relic that they honored and kept in their palaces. On the contrary, it concerns an ancient relic, a unique object that was given special significance and revered as a sacred treasure. It is this relic that helps us understand the age of the famous Sphinx, its origins, and its history. In this sense, the Turin Royal Canon transforms from an ordinary historical document into a crucial key to unlocking ancient secrets. It becomes not just a chronological table, but a kind of map pointing to possible locations of treasures or valuables hidden deep in time. This text seems to tell us, you are looking in the right place, but at the wrong time. It hints that the true history began long before we have been led to believe. This ancient manuscript is a testament to the ancient Egyptians themselves, who claim that their era and culture are much longer and more mysterious than modern researchers assume. They suggest that Egypt's history is not only a long chain of events, but also a complex, sometimes strange, sometimes even astonishing and unexpected one, rich in secrets. With this new perception of chronological boundaries, we can boldly revisit the most enigmatic artifacts, which until now have been perceived more as curiosities or strange finds. Now we begin to see them not as random and inexplicable objects, but as potential evidence of a long-lost civilization. These artifacts are like pieces of a mosaic that, viewed through the prism of a new chronology, start to form an astonishing and multifaceted picture of a culture with remarkable knowledge and skills. One of the first examples that draw particular attention is light, or rather its absence, because light is not only a source of illumination, but also an important element related to understanding ancient technologies. First and foremost, attention should be paid to the corridors and chambers of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, decorated with exquisite reliefs and paintings created by ancient artistry. These works of art impress with their detail and craftsmanship. To create such masterpieces in complete darkness, when the interiors of the tombs were shrouded in absolute darkness, artists required a constant and bright light source capable of illuminating work surfaces for a very long time, sometimes up to 1,000 hours. The commonly accepted explanation for this fact is the use of oil lamps, which, despite their efficiency, always leave traces of soot and ash. However, it is astonishing that the ceilings of many tombs remain impeccably clean, as if they have never been touched by dirt or soot. There is no trace of the black soot that would inevitably have accumulated over years of work and lighting. Egyptologists have proposed various hypotheses trying to explain this mysterious fact. Among them are the use of special wicks with salt, which reduce smoke formation, or the installation of complex systems of mirrors and reflective surfaces to direct light inside the tombs. However, these theories face serious difficulties. The complexity and winding nature of the corridors, numerous turns and bends, make the use of mirror systems practically impossible. Light, passing through multiple reflections, quickly diminishes in strength, and after several such refractions within the corridor, it disappears, transforming into a tiny point that cannot be illuminated. That is why, when considering the mystery of lighting without traces of soot, we must remember one of the most controversial and enigmatic scenes found in Egyptian monuments. In the temple of the goddess Hathor in Dendera, in its underground crypt, series of reliefs were discovered that leave a strong impression on the modern viewer. They depict human figures holding objects that strongly resemble giant light bulbs. These elongated, transparent forms contain a writhing snake emerging from a lotus flower located at the base of the object. Inside the light bulb, one can discern many details. Many proponents of a certain hypothesis, often engineers by profession, point out that the find in question remarkably resembles the famous Crookes tube. This tube is one of the early types of gas discharge devices that emit light when high voltage is applied. In this case, the intriguing object appears to be a figure in which one can see the shape of a serpent. Researchers suggest that this snake is essentially a bundle of electrons moving through space. The question arises, is it possible that the ancient Egyptians, or even their predecessors, possessed knowledge of electricity? This idea seems so incredible that it is difficult to take it seriously. After all, no wires, generators, or filament threads, usually associated with electrical devices, have been discovered from that time. Nevertheless, there is one very interesting artifact known as the Baghdad Battery, found in neighboring Mesopotamia. This object, dating to approximately 2 years before our era, is a clay vessel containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with an electrolyte, such as grape juice, it can generate a small electrical voltage. Although this voltage is insufficient to power a light bulb, the fact remains, ancient people may have possessed basic knowledge of electrochemistry and electrolysis. The light emitted by this vessel itself is not proof of the existence of electricity. But when considering it in conjunction with the absence of soot in ancient tombs, and in the context of other technological anomalies, it becomes yet another troubling fragment of the mystery. This fragment is another key to understanding. There is another such, no less mysterious object, the famous Saqqar bird. It is a small artifact made from sycamore wood, found in tombs in 1898 and dated to approximately 2 years before our era. For many years, it was regarded as a toy or weather vane, intended for decoration or protection in the afterlife. However, in the 1970s, Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Masika drew attention to its features. He noted that the wings of this figurine have an ideally developed aerodynamic profile, which is remarkable for a simple object. Unlike traditional depictions of birds, this model has a tail positioned vertically, like a rudder on an airplane, and the wings are slightly inclined downward. Such a structure is characteristic of what is known as a negative transverse angle, used in modern aircraft to enhance maneuverability. The question arises, is this a simple toy, or perhaps a scale model of a glider designed for flight? Or is it a relic of lost knowledge that allowed ancient people to control the air? Experiments with handmade replicas have shown that this object is indeed capable of gliding, and therefore possesses some celestial knowledge. These findings suggest that in ancient times, humans may have possessed knowledge about flight that now seems incredible. Next, attention should be paid to the Giza complex, where the three famous pyramids are located. Their unique placement and size are no coincidence. Researcher Robert Bouvel, in his book titled The Mystery of Ion, proposed that these three pyramids on Earth are not merely architectural structures, but a map reflecting the positions of the three brightest stars in the constellation Orion. He observed that their placement and dimensions, as well as their ratios, correspond to the apparent brightnesses of these stars. Moreover, the ventilation shafts inside the Great Pyramid, often called ventilation shafts, are actually star shafts. They were constructed with incredible precision and oriented to align with specific stars, such as Sirius and the stars of Orion's belt, as they appeared in the sky around 2,500 years before our era. But could the entire mysterious complex of pyramids and monuments at Giza serve not just as an architectural marvel, but as a vast time marker or an astronomical mechanism created by an ancient civilization that existed before known eras? Perhaps these structures were conceived as monuments to their time or as reminders of a cataclysm that led to their creation. These mysterious artifacts, as well as the features of their alignments, from the Serapeum to Dendera, from the Sakar bird to complex correlations with the Orion constellations, no longer appear to be random or isolated anomalies. The collection of these elements indicates the presence of a certain pattern. These signs point to knowledge in science and technology that, by modern standards, seems incredible for the era in which they are traditionally believed to have been created. They look like fragments of a shattered mirror of the past, each reflecting a bright but lost epoch of civilization. However, the full picture of that past is lost, and this is what sparks particular curiosity. The accumulation of such anomalies and mysterious discoveries forces us to do what any serious science must do when faced with contradictory data: question existing dogmas and paradigms. The official version of history, taught in schools and supported by academic circles, claims that human civilization developed gradually and linearly, as if according to a predetermined scheme. According to this view, our ancestors progressed from hunters and gatherers to farmers, then formed the first villages, later large cities, and ultimately complex civilizations such as the Egyptian one, which arose on a relatively primitive foundation. This narrative suggests a gradual accumulation of knowledge and technological progress, leading to increasingly advanced societies. However, the evidence and findings we consider point to a completely different scenario of development. They imply the existence of cycles, ups and downs, that recur throughout human history. Within this hypothesis, there is talk of a lost civilization that existed during the last ice age, a civilization previously thought to be merely a myth or legend. This hypothesis is no longer just a matter of fantasies and dreams. It has a tangible basis in geological, astronomical, and geological research data. Let us reconstruct the picture of that past. At some point during the last ice age, probably between 15,000 and 10,000 years ago, human civilization reached a very high level of development. It was not necessarily an industrial society like ours, but it possessed profound knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, engineering, and, most importantly, the skill to work stone with a precision that now seems unattainable. Presumably, this civilization was extensive, with a network of outposts and settlements around the world. In some places, in Egypt, South America, Tiahuanaco, Pumapunku, and other regions, There are megalithic structures that appear anomalous and require a special approach to understanding. About 12,800 years ago, an event related to the late Triassic occurred, probably a collision with a comet or asteroid that triggered massive climate changes. This event plunged the planet into chaos. Sea levels rose, powerful earthquakes began, and catastrophic floods destroyed most traces of this highly advanced civilization. Only the most durable monuments remain, such as the Sphinx and possibly underground structures in Saqqara. Those who survived were scattered and traumatized. They can be envisioned as carriers of ancient knowledge, as missionaries traveling the world and teaching the remaining primitive cultures the basics of agriculture, astronomy, and social organization. These people did not start their journey from scratch, as if with a blank slate. Instead, their knowledge and skills were built upon a solid and ancient foundation laid many centuries, perhaps even millennia earlier. They inherited the wisdom of their ancestors, accumulated over centuries, but did not necessarily possess the technology to realize or reproduce everything that remained in their heritage. This circumstance helps to explain one mystery associated with the Serapeum, an ancient monument shrouded in numerous secrets and ambiguities. They revered sarcophagi as sacred objects connected to their gods and ancestors, as holy relics that contained not only the bodies of the deceased but also the power, knowledge, or memory of the past. However, they did not have the means to precisely reproduce or restore these ancient rituals and technologies. They might have used a knife made of meteoric iron, similar to the one belonging to Tutankhamun, so-called gift from the heavens, but they did not know how to produce iron independently, nor the technology for smelting and processing it. They could record myths about the creation of the world that mysteriously describe structures and devices similar to those found in Dendera, yet they lost the scientific knowledge that would make such constructions possible and understandable. This perspective on human civilization's history is profound and sometimes even frighteningly impressive. It suggests that we are not at the pinnacle of progress, that our achievements are merely the latest wave in a vast, turbulent, and multi-layered flow of time. It indicates that civilization is very fragile and that knowledge accumulated over centuries can be lost, disappearing forever. And that is why the ancient Egyptians are not so much inventors of everything new, but rather custodians of memory, heirs to a forgotten world that was far more advanced and mysterious than it appears at first glance. Our research has led us from the depths of the ancient Serapeum, a sacred complex where mystical relics were kept, to the heights of the stars shining over Giza, from erosion and cracks on the surface of the Sphinx to fragile papyri that preserve records of divine kings. We have gathered numerous pieces of evidence, connected individual facts, and based on them, proposed a completely new, radical interpretation of our ancient past. But as in any real investigation, there are almost no definitive answers. Instead, even deeper and more intriguing questions arise. For example, if this pre-dynastic civilization truly existed, who were its people? Where did they come from? What language did they speak? And what was their society like? Their stone monuments impress with their grandeur and craftsmanship, yet they remain very silent, revealing no secrets. What is hidden inside the recently discovered large void within the Great Pyramid? According to scientists, it is a simple structural anomaly caused by natural processes or faulty construction. Or perhaps it is a concealed chamber, intentionally sealed, that may contain records, artifacts, or information from this vanished civilization, something long speculated by mediums and seers, such as Edgar Cayce. And what can be said about the mysterious tomb of Cleopatra? In the search of archaeologist Kathleen Martinez, who is investigating Taposiris Magna, there is a hypothesis that the last queen of Egypt, as a guardian of ancient knowledge, chose her burial site connected to the most ancient and primal myths. Perhaps this very tomb, if it can be found, will become the final key to unraveling not only her identity, but also the lost treasures of the Library of Alexandria, which stored knowledge of long-extinct worlds and civilizations. These questions are not for dreamers or science fiction enthusiasts. They are real frontiers of archaeological, scientific, and historical research. History is not a closed book. It is a book that is constantly opening. Your attentive attitude, as well as your likes and subscriptions, play a very important role for us. They help us understand that our work is valued and interests you. Every action of yours inspires us to continue creating new content and to make it even better. Equally important for us is a reminder to click the notification bell. This small icon allows you to stay always informed about all the latest news and events we publish. Thanks to it, you won't miss any new videos or updates that might be interesting or useful to you. We appreciate your support and hope that our materials continue to bring you benefit and enjoyment.